Hi, this is Dr. Catherine Williams, and you've tuned in to Ask Dr. Cat on BellaV TV. Tonight we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of people are interested in, which is online schooling. As many of you know, school districts across the nation have decided to go virtual for this fall, and to that end, I brought in several of our experts to talk to us about online school and strategies for teachers and parents alike to help with virtual learning. First, I want to introduce you to my co-host, Dr. Neha Bahadur. Hi, Neha.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Again, Alexis is still traveling, so happy to have Dr. Neha Bahadur on board to help with this topic. Neha, would you like to introduce our guests?
Yeah, I'm going to start with our two amazing local teachers, Ms. Priceman and Ms. Latta. They're both Muirlands Middle School teachers. Julie, I'll start with you. Julie has been a teacher at Muirlands for almost 20 years. She's a science teacher, one of the most favorite teachers on campus. I've heard about her even before my kids got to Muirlands. She, in 2019, was district runner-up for Teacher of the Year, which is a huge recognition, in part for her development of the triage program to help struggling students. So welcome, Julie Latta.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And then next, I'd like to introduce Laura Preisman. She's an English teacher at Muirlands. I actually learned today that she was a student herself at Muirlands in La Jolla High School. So she is a locally grown teacher. She was Teacher of the Year semifinalist, runner-up a couple years ago. She's the GATE seminar team leader at Muirlands. Has implemented a speech master's program in her class. And my middle schooler had the privilege of being both in Ms. Latta and Ms. Priceman's classes this past year. So it's a privilege to be here with you guys. And Dr. Cat, I'll pass it on to you to introduce our professors.
Thank you. So Dr. Tiffany Roman, who is a professor. Hi, thanks for joining in from Kennesaw State University. And Dr. Roman, you've been teaching teachers how to teach online. Pretty much that's your career, right?
Yes.
And especially with this global pandemic, you recently published in the Journal of Technology and Teacher Education on teaching and learning during COVID times. And I'm particularly interested because you also, I think you published on the topic of trauma-informed teaching practices. And for me as a mental health professional, I'm particularly interested in that because in the upcoming year, in a global pandemic, there may be many of our students who are coming in with specific traumas related to COVID. And so I think, a trauma-informed approach is something that is pretty much of a hot topic right now amongst mental health professionals. So I'm really happy to have you on board. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Dr. Brittany Holt. Hi.
Hi.
Associate Professor of Special Education in the Department of Educational Psychology at University of Oklahoma. And your particular area of specialty is really on rural education. And so you've done a lot of work on sort of virtual or remote learning. I think remote learning is probably the right vocabulary for that, right? The right terms. And helping with underserved, under-resourced, as well as under-researched rural schools. And I believe you're publishing a paper on online learning for rural education, and that's coming out shortly. Is that right?
Yes, it's going to come out shortly in Rural Special Ed Quarterly.
Thank you. So we'll look out for that too. So thank you, all four of you, for coming. Perhaps we could start off with Dr. Roman, Dr. Holt, on what are some of the stories on online schooling or online teaching or learning that kind of have stood out to you for better or for worse?
Well, I can go first. I think how it's very contextual to the learning environment of a child and the place that they live, and also the school district where a teacher may work. So you see variations across a given state where students may not have access to technology in the home, and so teachers have been asked to provide, let's say, paper packets during COVID-19 teaching and learning, whereas other school districts might be one-to-one, and so there's different expectations. And so I think it really just depends on where people are. For my own self, I would have to say, if I have to say something that's kind of memorable for me, being a parent of two school-aged children, I have one that's entering kindergarten and one that's entering third grade, or fourth grade actually, was just some of the successes and also the setbacks. I think that to paint a rosy picture would be inaccurate. I think every day was unique, but that there were positive moments and also some more challenging ones. So even if you are a person who knows online teaching and learning well, it doesn't mean that it's smooth sailing at one's home, trying to balance it all.
What would you say is a particularly successful moment for you or experience for you?
I think just some of the cute moments that make you smile and laugh. My son did choir practice and he had his headphones on. And so you just hear his voice, which wasn't necessarily, maybe if I finds this video years down the road, was not in tune, but he was just having so much fun singing in unison with all of his classmates on Zoom, or just sort of the small learning activities my daughter did. Like she would do, her teacher did small lessons with groups of four to five children, and they made a bird nest. And so she gathered pine needles around her house beforehand, and the teacher talked about how do you make a bird nest, what might be involved, and then they practiced making it. And then she brought a stuffed animal that was bird shaped and an egg, because it was around Easter time, and created this little like nest, if you will. So I mean, some things that probably I never would have done myself as a parent that just turned out to be cute learning moments in the springtime.
Those are those kind of silver lining moments, right? Dr. Hott, how about you?
One of the defining moments was in a rural school district that has approximately 600 kids that they serve in the entire district. Not a one-to-one district before COVID, but their assistant superintendent just got on top of it immediately. And she got hotspots. They worked with parents who said, I'm just uncomfortable with online learning. I don't know how to support my child. They made resource buckets. There were manipulatives for schedules and math manipulatives and creative teaching going on that you just wouldn't have thought about in the year 2020. We had landline phones having conversations with parents, and resource distribution centers were placed at churches and funeral homes and at the school, and we followed state guidelines. They had guidelines in place at first when you receive a learning packet, essentially worksheets that the district was so awesome as to include manipulatives, hands-on projects that parents could use and students could use that were accessible. But when they turned that work back in, teachers had to wait 48 hours to grade and provide feedback, which is not great pedagogy, but did at the time try to keep everybody safe. And so in that meantime, they'd call students and call parents and say, hey, how did you do on this? What do you think? And talking through it, which is an evidence-based practice. They set goals with students and families. Mom and dad, this is a tough time. Hey, kids, what do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And so it was those personal relationships that's one of the strengths of rural localities that they really capitalized on to make it work. And did kids get an ideal education? Absolutely not. As Dr. Roman said, we can't paint a rosy picture that says this is perfect. Parents face tough choices, schools face tough choices, but somehow they just got through it together by capitalizing on their strengths and what they do have in their district, which are supportive parents, a strong community, and a school board that I just have to say just rocks.
Julie, I saw you nodding your head. What about what Dr. Hott said rings true to you and applied to your experience? We're not in a rural area, but we do have a lot of diversity in our student body.
Yeah, I guess I was at focusing on the positive. I like how Dr. Katz said the silver linings. I think there have been a number of silver linings in this very tough situation. We have all struggled as kids, as parents, families, communities, teachers, districts, our site administrators. We obviously, this has been a time where we've been struggling and really pushing the edges of our capabilities. But I think that there really are some silver linings that have come out of this. And I think there's some learning that's going on at rapid pace, which that's what the struggle is. I mean, we can do this, it's that we have to do it so fast, right? And we now have, as opposed to what was going on in the spring, where literally on Thursday, we thought we were staying on site, and Friday we were told we're going home on Friday, March 13th. And our district, I'm in San Diego Unified, give us sort of the soft launch for 2 weeks, but most teachers knew that our kids were waiting on us and expecting something. Our families were expecting something. So we all jumped in on Monday the 16th and just started rolling. And so we're there, you know, some bumps in the road, you know, some teachers who were more or less up to speed as far as rolling out the technology. Some of us, some people were more comfortable with the technology, already had very active digital classrooms, and others didn't. In particular, elementary school teachers had less of that because that's appropriate for their children. So it became this very steep learning curve in the spring. But I think that we all learned a lot. We've all been working through the summer. And I think there's going to be a lot of what we've learned during this time that will be taken back into the on-site environment, where we're going to, you know, basically improve ourselves, and the dividends are going to pay off forever as we sort of expand our digital presence and take our kids into the 21st century. So it's a quick process right now, and you know we're running to stand still at the moment, but I think there are a lot of silver linings that are going to come out of this. And I think ultimately, if we can just kind of relax, you know, play a simple role as parents and community members and trust our teachers, I think you guys can count on the fact that we're going to be able to do this, and we're going to be able to, you know, not only get through this year, but also bring some really positive things into the future. So I think that's, my nodding was related to that.
And Laura, what do you think were some of the lessons learned by you and your colleagues about distance learning that will kind of guide you into the fall?
Well, I would say that the lessons that were not necessarily learned, but maybe reiterated, were the idea of being flexible and communicative. That would be the two things I would take away from that experience. And I mean, specifically, I think Dr. Hott had mentioned this, that the communication with parents, when things weren't up and running immediately, or if there were questions, sometimes it was just easier to have somebody reach out, talk to them, or do a little personal Zoom. And I think that, you know, we're so conditioned, particularly as our students are older in the upper middle school grades and other secondary, you know, high school, that it's not okay to approach the teacher with a question. And I really think that the communication and the transparency is what makes it successful. So I've learned, you know, I to communicate readily with the parents and to allow students to send questions at all times, either, and, you know, just to feel like hopefully they felt that they could approach any educator in that manner, because I think that's how we all grow. And then also, you know, if I'm doing something that's not working or isn't working for them, that they can say that, so then we can be flexible and grow. So I think the key is that everyone needs to realize that it's not a perfect process, but it could be really fabulous. And it is something, you know, there's so many tools and interesting things that I've learned through this process. And I consider myself fairly technical. We at Muirlands were a beta site for Google about 6 years ago. And I know that Ms. Latta and I really dove in, and I'm always excited about learning. I mean, I would say that as educators, we are definitely also students. And just, you know, being ready, embracing that and ready to not necessarily fail, but to grow. And if we make a mistake, see if there's something positive that can come out of that mistake. So sorry if I was rambling a little bit. I'm not sure if I answered.
And I might just add on to what Laura's saying is that teachers are used to thinking on our feet. That's what we do all day long. And we're used to selling ideas under tough circumstances. You know, maybe it's just a kid who's bored with what we're doing, or is having a social issue or problem, or something's going on at home, or maybe they're just not interested in the topic that we're covering. I mean, we're used to selling ideas all the time. So, you know, we're gonna step forward and try and, you know, keep that sale going, you know, even in this environment.
And there's something so interesting you said, Laura, that just made me rethink my position as a parent, because like you said, as kiddos are going into middle school, we want to give them more autonomy. You know, if Sonia has a question, I say, well, write the email yourself. You know, I can help you look at it, but, you know, you need to take ownership of this now. But maybe in this time of COVID and confusion and stress, it's appropriate for parents to step in a little bit more, you know, and kind of help kids navigate these times.
Yeah, and I think that people are so reluctant to, oh, I don't want to bother you, and I know how busy you are. And absolutely, and I maintain this the very first day of school, brick and mortar school, I say, and back to school night, if you have a question, email me, call me, whatever it is, but get it answered. Don't worry about don't let it sit for the weekend and you're asking 55 other people and you never get the answer you want. Just ask me. If I can't answer, and I communicate readily, it's just my thing, but I think that way there's no miscommunication, misunderstanding if you go right to the source. And I do know that Dr. Roman, I caught this too. I mean, I think for me, the very best thing that happened to my teaching was being a parent. And my two daughters are definitely, one is really reluctant to communicate. She doesn't want to bother anyone. And absolutely, I am not allowed to communicate to the high school teachers. But in this time, I feel like we're kind of inventing it. You know, we have to be flexible. And certainly as parents and as teachers, we want to get the answers correct. And we want to move on and not let things like little miscommunications stop us in our tracks. So, yeah.
Yeah. And to add to that too, I think when I was working with teachers this summer, that our middle school and high school math and science teachers, many of them have Microsoft as their district technology that they use. And one of the nice features about Microsoft Teams is that it has sort of, for those in the tech industry or familiar with Slack, it has the ability to kind of post where you can have students, you know, they're not necessarily maybe working they may be or should be working during school day hours, but they might also be working later if they're high school students, to be able to have a way to kind of track that communication in a central place where students can ask each other questions. And so just trying to get, I think teachers have done a wonderful job communicating, but it's if you're not getting that response back like you would in the classroom, you just don't know if everything's going okay. You can communicate with them on the Zoom meetings where you get some insight into how they're doing, but just having, some central places, whether it's using a tool like Remind, which provides the text messages, to parent phones, or using a school learning management system, but just the communication piece is key. And I really would love if there's opportunities for parents and teachers to have town halls just with their classes where they can just talk and hear. I think setting that tone from the beginning could be really helpful and impactful. If they're not starting, if there is no opportunity for a meet and greet night, just hearing what the teacher has planned and allowing parents to ask questions might be really beneficial going into this fall.
And I could add to that, one of the key, I think, advice I could give to parents would be to really less on trying to help your children with the content, teaching your kids math and reading and, the science, and focus on helping them with that organization. And you mentioned the learning management system. At least in our district at San Diego Unified, at the elementary level, they're using either Google Classroom or Seesaw. And at the secondary level, they're using either Google Classroom or Canvas are sort of the options that are being put forth from our district. And all districts will maybe use a different learning management system, but something that we heard loud and clear through the spring and the summer from debriefing our students, talking and surveying our parents, even our student rep on our school board, the feedback he was getting from his classmates was one learning management system in a school. And that is something that there's a commitment, at least in our district, to do. And so I would suggest to parents to know what that learning management system is. So for example, if it is Google Classroom, make sure that you understand how it works. And this is something, again, a silver lining that's going to come out of this is that in school, we train the kids how to use the learning management system. But we assume that they're telling their parents how to use it, and they're not. This is what I'm really finding out. And I sort of would find this out sometimes when we would have on-site meetings with parents. It's like, do you know Google Classroom? Do you know? Not really. I haven't used it. I don't know, So this is something that is very important, that the parents really learn the learning management system. And understanding that a learning management system, for example, Google Classroom, is simply just like the brick and mortar classroom. It is simply a place where assignments go out, they get handed back in. It's a place to collaborate with your classmates and to create groupings, and it's a place to give and receive help. That's all it is. It's a link to the rest of the learning. And so if parents focus on that learning management system and understand how that works, I think they're going to be much better equipped to help their kids to stay on board. And particularly now that we're at a point, at least in our district, where we are going to be using one. So for example, last school, some teachers might have been using something in Google Classroom, even though primarily that's what we used, as Laura said. We're an adopter with the Google Learning Management System. So we'll use one, right? And this is a sort of one-stop shopping where you're going to see, the math, the English, the history, the electives, they're all going to be in one place, and all the assignments are going to be pulled from there. So I would just, again, emphasize to parents to pay attention to the learning management system and less worrying about, oh my gosh, I can't help my kids with the math, or because we can help them with that. We'll make sure they get what they need there. But that organizational piece. And then secondly, I might just add on to that as a second piece of kind of major advice that I might give to parents is to create a schedule for your kids and create it in a time of calm. Don't create it in a time where, oh my gosh, you have 3 things due. And oh my gosh, we're making a schedule right now. You're getting off track. And make it in a time of calm and post it visually for everyone to see. And then decide in that time of calm to also meet weekly to adjust the schedule, because that's not going to be set or understood. And we're going to be working it out as far as the time they're meeting, in their Zoom meetings, or they're meeting, they're doing their own independent digital work. So those are going to be adjusting over the first few weeks. So again, maybe setting a weekly time to meet and adjust that schedule. Set timers for that daily schedule working, and timers go off and fun begins, or maybe school is fun. I don't know. I hope. I have students who said school was the best part of their day in the spring. And, just really set those times. Dr. Kat, I'm sure you would agree, just from a social emotional standpoint, to allow kids to be empowered and create those schedules, and then really be consistent and make them stick to it with clear consequences and rewards and punishments that come in play as those schedules are not met. That's the reality if they were with us on site. So it's something to try. And I know my own kids were worse with me than they ever were with any teacher. I get that. But kind of setting those expectations, I think, is really helpful.
Just to echo Mrs. Latta, creating that sense of community and that sense of communication is critical. Not all parents, I'll tell you, myself included, I'm not a techie. I use technology to teach my classes, and I use what's efficient, but realize that it's a learning curve for everybody. Teachers are learning, parents are learning, students are learning. We're all in this together. Simple things, as Ms. Latta said, like setting up a consistent work environment if you can. Is there a time of day and a location in your home, parents, that you can provide a consistent learning environment? And on the flip side, teachers, can you be available almost for office hours at certain times that work for your community, your parents, your classroom? Having an agenda book, that same agenda book that you're using for school, works to plan your online instruction. Discussing that calendar and those due dates and setting it up and being flexible. Working with struggling learners or learners who may have disabilities, there may need to be modifications and accommodations. Coming back to that individualized education program plan and meeting as a team and working through it together is huge. Teaching kids, my children are 3 and 5. We set goals and we monitor our progress with crayons towards those goals. And they work for praise. I know this changes as kids get into middle and high school, but right now a gummy bear and a high five is how we're getting through work. And just keeping in mind, even middle schoolers, that attention span is 15 minutes, high school, maybe 20. And for our little ones in preschool and kindergarten, those attention spans are not an hour. You're lucky to get 3 to 5 minutes. And so it's and middle school too, as a former middle school teacher, as a college professor, as someone who works with adults, none of our teaching, no matter what we do or best practices that we use, attention spans are there and we're in a crisis. And so that flexibility, those consistent procedures on both ends, parents, families, kids, really helps meet those goals and realize there are going to be bumps in the road. This is a pandemic. We had a flu in 1918, and that is the research base that we have that talks about kind of pandemics. We also know a lot about online education, remote education. We know a lot about evidence-based practices. Teachers, if you have a family and you watch mom and dad struggle, set up a self-monitoring program for the child. Go ahead and get those virtual manipulatives. They not only work for academics, they also work for time on task. I've got my 15 students in a Zoom meeting, and I know I got to pop that star up, pop that smiley face up, use pop culture. Sometimes that's fun for middle and high schoolers, and just keeping everybody engaged and realizing, this year we're going to learn a lot, but it may not be what was on that initial schedule. And I just love how Ms. Latta has said, you know what, I'm flexible. Parents, hold your kids accountable. I'm going to do my part. You do your part. Universities, we also need to be doing our part. Dr. Roman mentioned working with middle and high school STEM teachers. We're a resource for research and for evidence-based practices, and forming those partnerships, particularly in smaller districts that may not have access to specialists, is huge. Being able to reach out to teachers and say, how's this working? And then help them test it. Assessment right now is huge. Progress monitoring, making sure our kids are doing the best they can, and trying to figure out that bump before it becomes a mountain. Keeping the bumps and keeping positive attitude and those consistent learning environments. I love it. I love hearing from Mrs. Latta and Mrs. Priceman about how, that's what they're doing. And they're using these really cool Google Classrooms.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add that middle schoolers will do almost anything for a Jolly Rancher as well. So they're not beneath that. I just wanted to say something about our kids with IEPs, with individual education plans. And it's not to say that it was a perfect world, but a lot of my students who had IEPs during distance learning really excelled, because the pacing, they were able to move at a pace that was their own. It wasn't always the pace of the 50-minute bell-to-bell classroom. The lessons online were incredibly visual. They were interactive with simulations, with video, with their ability to, create something that was visual. We had to put everything, it wasn't just all, there was less ability to speak it to them. We had to put it into some sort of either written, audio, visual, some sort of form. So I think, again, I don't want to be Pollyanna about this, but again, a silver lining, some of the lessons that I created in the spring, I'm going to continue even when I'm back in brick and mortar, because I saw some of my special ed kids were having more success with that. Adapting, like you talked about, Dr. Hott, about assessments. We were already moving to a lot of digital assessments, especially when we're differentiating assessments for our kids with IEPs. And again, those assessments transferred, nicely to the digital medium. So I think that, that was something that if we could get the kids engaged, I think we had a decent chance to bring those kids with IEPs to sort of overcome some of their learning struggles.
And this is an area of, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Priceman.
No, I just, go ahead, I'll speak after, it's okay.
I was gonna say, this is such a huge area of concern that I'm hearing from parents who have kids that are struggling with their academics or struggling with engagement or behavior. And Dr. Roman, I was wondering how your research and experience would sort of guide best practices for teachers or parents who have kids that are struggling.
Well, I think it's okay that teachers should, if there's a student that sorts of drops off or stops coming to Zoom sessions, there are usually some procedures in place in schools where then the teachers will communicate out, or administrators can tell if someone hasn't logged into the learning management system. So, but you can then seek help for a child. Maybe if you haven't reached out to them yet, do so. I did that with my, I had about 3 or so in an undergraduate. I teach undergraduate teachers how to integrate technology when they become teachers. And so I had some of my own students drop off. So I reached out to them personally. I had set up a group me just for my class. And so then I privately addressed them. It wasn't in a large, obviously they weren't at the synchronous session, but followed up with them. Once I followed up, they came back, or they're like, they recognized the stresses that they were going through. And so I think that's one of the things, is keeping a perspective of really trauma-informed teaching practices that we need, first of all, for students to be safe. I mean, if you think about learner engagement, it's a really 3-dimensional construct, looking at affective behavior, behavioral engagement, and those are just very different dimensions. And one of them is really just saying, is the person okay? And making sure that you have a safe space where they can trust you. And so if they know her teachers are coming at it from a trust perspective, that's a good way to continue to have students of all ages remain engaged, because we want to have safe learning environments for them. I think that, did that answer your question?
I think especially coming into the new year where teachers don't know the students like you did.
That's what I was going to say.
Right.
Until last week, our teachers really spoke about really starting the year focusing on developing the relationship. We start getting into content. So we create this safe space and sense of community.
Right. And I think it's just giving students the opportunity to take time out of what would be more curriculum-driven instruction to allow time to say how they're feeling, and do it in a way that's, it can be anonymous. There's some tools out there that allow for everyone to respond at the same time, but you wouldn't necessarily see their names. And you just have to know your students what age group, because some allow you to monitor before things are posted, so that nothing inappropriate gets put up. But if you have college students like I do, I know they're speaking from their own truth. So that you can take time to check. And even when students are online together, and let's say teachers have them go into breakout rooms, which I encourage, because you're going to have a better engagement when there's 3 kids versus 30. coming together, is to give them that time to, just have that peer connection like they would at recess time, or they would in the lunchroom, and they would be able to have a little bit of talking time. So I think it's okay. We need to give ourselves permission to let them have a little bit of the peer moments that they're missing out from school. It'll make it probably their lives feel a little bit more adjusted.
And Laura, I know we were talking just in the last couple of days about some different tools that you had found that are some strategies to use at the beginning of the school year to engage kids in the social realm. Like, just, we have our ways when we're brick and mortar, but that's definitely something that you were digging into and you were sharing with me.
Is this Mrs. Priceman you're talking about?
Yeah, I missed, for some reason the Zoom went out, so I didn't hear any. I heard the very, so you're just some of the tools?
Yeah, you were telling me over the last couple of days about some tools that you've been finding, and you're going to be sharing out, some of the things that we can do, because we are acutely aware that it was tough to get kids to, even in my chattiest, most yelling out crazy interactive classes,
to get them
on Zoom, they don't talk. They don't talk as much. And this is something that we're really trying to work on, is getting that communication going. And we already had trust built by the time we left in the spring. So it's going to be extra hard this year. So Laura, you were.
I did. I also, I wanted to speak to one thing that Dr. Hott had said a while ago, and that is one of the biggest things that I found to be successful, and I would sort of plead for other teachers to employ, is the use of, they call it a dummy account, but to have a mock account so that you can see everything through the student's perspective, because that was critical. We talked about like breakout rooms, for example. I did breakout rooms actually in your daughter's class, and there were some problems with it. I thought it was amazing, and I thought, oh, they're in this, and this group is doing a great job. And then I kind of asked them, and some of them said, yeah, it's great, and some of them said, people are kind of messing around and not doing what they should do. So one of the things that I had to really think about was I either needed to set up, maybe not spies, but different students to serve as telling me. And then the other thing I did is, because we had Google Classroom and my daughters are in the district, I always attach them to my classes. And this is what I've told other teachers. I helped, there's another middle school, my daughter's middle school, one of the teachers there. And I asked her, I said, pick a few kids and ask them if they would test things, because at least for Google, they'll look about it, and they don't have this yet. They're working on having mock examples. The student view is quite different from the teacher view. So by having my own daughter, I attached her to her classroom, and then she would log in and see if it worked and if it did all the things that I thought it did. And then she would also tell me, because she's, and her mom, and she's not gonna sugarcoat it. So she would say, hey, this is not working, or this is too much work, or this doesn't show me what I need to see. And I think, we get really into that. I've created this beautiful presentation and they should appreciate it. And no, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I was talking to Julie about this, that one of the big things is, there's a big push to have Bitmojis out on your screen to make it super pretty. And I had told, we were in a meeting earlier this week, that what happens on the student's end of it is it takes forever to load. And if you have 6 people in the house all in a Zoom, there goes all of your time, and they can't hear or they can't see, and it's lost. So I think we have to be reflective. We have to have student dummy accounts, or at least ask students to give us honest feedback. Obviously, you have to have the relationship in some cases, but or if you can, set yourself up so you can see their perspective, and just be ready to adjust on the fly. And Jillian said that. I mean, we're teachers, that's what we do. We're fine with that, but we really have to kind of check the ego and make sure that we're ready to do what truly is best for the students. And as Dr. Roman said, what's good for one student may not be good for the other. And for me, the biggest challenge has been to differentiate particularly with different types of learners, with students who have IEPs, and just being cognizant that they all have strengths just like they do in the classroom, and it's easier in a classroom to have something that speaks to all of their gifts, if you will. But yeah, on the online setting, you really have
you can feel them when they're falling apart.
Right. So you just have to be really aware.
You recognize it, and online sometimes you don't recognize it.
Yeah. And check in with them. Be ready to think, hey, well, even though this kid said this was amazing and they're getting so much out of it, this kid maybe didn't get so much out of it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not entirely your fault. You don't have to internalize it, but you have to be ready to really investigate what works best for the student, and it does. And yes, again, I'm all about the relationships in the beginning and using all the tech stuff, but to the same token, you have to make sure that the kids can work the tech stuff too, or that it's not going to crash their entire family's system, and in your interest of being pretty, just make sure that it's realistic. Okay, sorry.
Oh, to follow up with that, those are great points. And I'm so pleased to hear general education teachers talk about kids with disabilities, who are often left out of these conversations. Yeah. We have kids with more complex needs that they're not going to access Google Classrooms. Their families are under tremendous, or maybe, I don't want to overgeneralize, but families may be under tremendous stress, and we have to do our best to implement the IEP and to provide those intensive supports and differentiated instruction. I really encourage both teachers and parents to capitalize on the expertise of trained special education teachers, speech and language pathologists, board certified behavior analysts, occupational therapists. There are a plethora of really qualified professionals that if we bring to the team, for instance, a child with an emotional behavior disability, we can bring in that speech pathologist who has experience running social groups and with social instruction to support us. We have folks who are board certified behavior analysts who have experience with telehealth delivery. We have guidance from the medical field about telehealth. Capitalizing on that and realizing that sense of community that we've all discussed is just paramount now. Mm-hmm. And I like that we're talking about all kids deserve and are entitled to a quality education. And we have to do the best we can now. Deliver that.
And I'd like to say that in all of my Zoom meetings, every day, every week, if I had kids with IEPs in my classroom, those special educators were in that meeting with me. Whether it was the case manager or it was the speech therapist or the OT, they were in those meetings. And then when the kids left, then we would chat. Now, it was difficult because our special ed team at our school is really tremendous. They really are. And their strength comes in being at the shoulder of these students throughout the day. They run miles around the school all day long. And so there were difficulties with them trying to kind of get that one-on-one contact with them, even though they were setting up small group Zoom meetings and individual meetings. And it's an area that we all need to work on. But I know I felt very supported by the special ed department at our school. And they were available and sending us communications. They were in touch, as we were too, but with the parents and what the struggles look like on the home side. They could be a conduit to communicate with us if the parents were not, giving us the whole scoop. So I agree with you. It's as always, it's a team effort, and we're all learning to kind of adjust to this new environment.
And we all want to help. I mean, I think that's, we're all ready to help in any way we can. And people just have to ask and know where to look, and we can figure it out together. Yeah.
So teachers, what I'm hearing so far as a parent, because I'm kind of jotting down, right, all these terrific strategies. So what I'm hearing is, number one, communication is key, so much more than we might be. Because I'm with Neha, where I'm like, you talk to the teacher on your own. I'm going to step back and I'm not going to bother the teacher. What I'm hearing is really, because this is a different kind of year, to go ahead and step out of that comfort zone and contact the teachers, or have really good communication back and forth. So that's one. Number two is to be, to help with the organization. And Ms. Latta, I'm so happy to hear that I don't have to teach my kids math or science, but especially math. I usually try to disappear to another part of the house whenever they have difficulties with their math. But instead to really help with the organizational piece. So perhaps looking at, having how to do a schedule and collaborating with the kid on how to do that. So there may be, I might have to go buy some Jolly Ranchers. I'm hearing from you, that's a good one. And so some,
I does it at all times. It's amazing. What else is
all right. So Amazon's going to have a lot of orders on back order now.
And pair that gummy bear or that Jolly Rancher with behavior specific praise. Tell that kid what they've done right. Tell that teacher, if your teachers like gummy bears too.
Yeah.
Tell that teacher, tell them what they
At
do.
home, though, you may have to crank it up a notch because they expect more from you there. So it might be ice cream sundae. I don't know. But I don't know. It might be hard for you, the parents at home.
Yeah, maybe a gummy bear and a Jolly Rancher, right? Or
They'll let you. Yeah.
And then we'll have a dentist visit at the end of the year. So that's the second. And the third I'm hearing, especially from Dr. Hott, Ms. Latta and Ms. Priceman, is that for the kids who have individualized needs, or whether they have IEPs or they're just kind of struggling in a particular subject, is to talk to the schools about how do we individualize those needs? How do we access, for example, an SLP? Should it be a Zoom meeting? Are there social skills groups that are being run by a counselor, for example, and tapping into those perhaps in the afternoons? One thing I wanted to ask you about, we're sort of winding up in the hour, is what are some very concrete strategies that parents, as well as other teachers, can take? So something I'm thinking of, for example, is active learning spaces. Dr. Roman, I know that's an area you've done research in, is learning spaces, right? Perhaps you could start off with that.
Yeah, so I think finding a space where your child can focus. But this also is a challenge for adults as well. I have a grant through Steelcase Corporation. They just sent out a report that mentioned how I think only 30% of Americans are satisfied with their office chair, or feel like they have a dedicated place to work. I have colleagues that are working out of closets because that's the spot that's left. Their children may have occupied the other places in the house. And maybe spots were identified in advance, but just knowing where your child works well and using, I think timers have been mentioned earlier, can be helpful for older, but also for younger, adapting to their needs. They may not necessarily want to be in a small space with a timer with them, but they may work well with like a whiteboard and a checklist. Or for my younger child, having works that she can choose from. So setting out different kind of like low shelves, just profile. My house cannot be shot for any sort of magazine when you have all the learning materials out, but thinking about how you can set up a space that works for your child, and keeping all the strategies already suggested with planners, but giving them a chance for movement as well. I don't know if that's been really discussed yet, about they would have movement during the day, and sometimes if a student's in the zone, you don't want to interrupt them, but so knowing when would be a good time for them to get up and move, or giving them the opportunity to maybe do an activity in one space, like a reading nook, if they need some quiet time or indoor break time, that they're still practicing their literacy, but just in a dedicated space for that. So looking across one's house, but it depends. If you have a 600 or 700 foot tiny apartment in New York, you're not going to have the same liberties as someone who has a larger single family home. So it really is contingent on the family, but making the best of what you have, or knowing where you can go if there's safe places that allow sort of watching students during the day. I think that's one of the things that I'm sort of interested in, are these pop-up learning pods where your child, maybe parents are getting together saying, hey, this spring, me at home working with them all day, 5 days a week is not working. Where parents are kind of coming together. I think that's interesting from a teacher side. is what if you plan a Zoom meeting and a child's in a space with 50, I don't know how many other children, 6 other children who it may not be in this smaller, quiet environment like we had in spring. So, but getting back to the question, I think just working with your kid to find that focus spot if you're keeping them at home and they're not going elsewhere.
I wonder if it would be also helpful when you're looking at that spot is to also look during the time of the day that they would be having their Zoom lessons. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, one of the strategies I recommend to parents is if, let's say, they have Zoom lessons from 10 to 12. So you've identified an area for them in the house, is to actually go there between 10 and 12 before school starts in the fall and see what kind of noises are around. And it just might happen to be that during that time, that's when the trucks are going by, or that's when somebody's doing construction or something that maybe you don't notice when you're choosing that spot at 5 p.m. Evening.
And I might just, as Dr. Roman was talking, it made me think of a strategy that works all the time, but especially in this environment, which is when the kids are working, the whole house is working or reading or doing something quiet. So it's not like you're, the parent or the caregiver or whomever it is, off back in the back room watching a great movie and saying, all right, go do your homework. Where the whole house sort of stops and says, we're going to do something that helps us grow. And as the caregiver, it might be that you're going to read, or you're going to rewrite some recipes that you want to make, or reorganize your calendar, or something like that. But I think that encourages the kids that they're not alone, and I think it mimics the real in-class experience. In our classrooms, Laura and I would never let kids over here doing whatever that's fun while kids over here are working. Everyone is working, and if they finish, they'll transition to something else that at least looks like work and looks academic. So I think that's just something I would piggyback on with that.
And that's that's a standard reading procedure that, if you want to have good readers, you have to mimic that behavior. But yeah, I agree with that. You can't be, binging on Netflix while your kids are or working, because then they feel like maybe they're missing out, or maybe there's an alternative. I don't know. I also thought it would be fun. I mean, I know my daughter and I are planning to maybe exercise every morning together. I think it's really important that if you can, to let kids go outside for, a chunk of time every day, if it is possible. Either at the beginning of the day or maybe just between, like, as if they were switching classes for those upper grades. Yeah, I think that's important. And maybe if you have a bell in your house, you could ring the bell. Okay. Yeah.
And as far as it going around and saying, what would be a key focus, I'm just going to re-emphasize to parents to become familiar with the learning management system that your kid's school is using, and make sure that you understand it. I know at our school, this is another silver lining. We're talking about putting together a video to send out to all our parents that will be helping the parents to navigate, and we'll do like a screencastify of, all right, here is Google Classroom or Canvas, whichever we're going to use. But that will be decided very shortly, right, Laura? Because we're nipping at the bit to make sure that we can stay consistent. But putting that out there, and obviously there are a lot of online YouTube videos that can help to train parents and kids on that. We'll be training the kids in our Zoom meetings with that and helping them through, and parents can, look over their shoulder and be part of that. But I think we're also, planning to send out something explicitly to our parents to help them know what that system is, and then give them some tools for assisting their kids in using it. So just doing your best to educate yourself on that management system, that's going to help you to pull in the loose ends.
I wonder if having the kids show us how to do it would be helpful.
Yeah, and most kids, other than lower elementary, but even as a 6th grade teacher, and those kids coming brand new into middle school, and that's already intimidating enough under the best of circumstances. And now for the first time in this environment to have 5 or 6 different teachers is going to be overwhelming for them. Again, why in this situation, the management system is important. But the kids, many of our fifth graders coming in have already been using a learning management system. So they, of course, as you said with Dr. Cat about, teaching your kids math, it's amazing how quickly our kids become smarter than we are. They do know a lot, and they can share a lot with what they know. Yeah.
Are there anything else that you would recommend in terms of concrete strategies that parents or teachers? Ms. Priceman, you have something in mind?
I was going to say this one is probably not a very favorable one, and I would be hypocritical at best, but that is to have a schedule or to try to work out a schedule. And I really like that Julie said doing it at a time of calmness, because I know that I'm one to, oh my gosh, she's been up really late for the last 4 nights. So tonight, when she's exhausted, is not the time to maybe sit down and figure that out. But I think it's important that we treat it like, as we say to our students, this is your job. So that parents need to, kind of put their foot down. And if it might be a different story where there are set times when classes are meeting, which was not completely the case last spring. But regardless, they're not staying up till midnight and sleeping till noon. I just think that kind of, it starts to impact everything. So just treating it like this is business per usual. And then should we be able to go back to school, to the actual classroom at some point, it would be an easier transition, because they don't have to remember that they go to bed at 8 or 9 at night, that this is just a different way of doing things, but we're still treating it seriously. I know that that's the schedule.
Yeah, I can tell you, I can promise you that my kids are sleeping later and later and sleeping in, as well as myself. So does it sound accurate to suggest that about 2 weeks before school starts, that parents sit down with their kids individually, I have 4 of them, so I say individually, and then kind of collaboratively come up with a schedule together. Like, what do you think is a reasonable time for you to go to bed at night? They might say 11, I might say 9, we come to 10, or something along those lines. How many minutes of break do you want? When do you want your recess time? Were you going to say something, Mrs. Priceman?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the only thing I would say is, just like anything else, you have to be flexible. And I know with my high schooler, she had one day she'd have a really large project that she didn't want to go to bed until it was finished. So just as long as you communicate that with your kids. This is our best case scenario, but we understand that sometimes life gets in the way, and that's true. And if everybody can remember that for all of this,
yes,
and I think, and have a little bit of a sense of humor and be flexible, and remember that, it's, I don't know, I tell my kids to always, that we should, it's easy to get caught up in how, unprecedented and scary this time is. But if we can remember to be grateful for what we have, and that, I think my family, we actually kind of like each other, and that we can, we are in this together, and your teachers are supportive, and your classmates, and this has never happened. So we just have to remember that and do the best that we can with a little grace, plan for the best, expect that life will get messy, and, just hopefully, because we have planned and we have strategies in place, it doesn't become overwhelming, maybe a couple of times, but not all the time, and that we can be ultimately successful. And I'm 100% with all of you who've said this, reiterating the positive attitude is crucial. So, and that's also like, hey, let's create a schedule, not we have to create a schedule, just being really proactive, positive, and planning. So.
And to build on, I think it's helpful to look at, for schedule, it can just be a work block. Like, we're doing a work block, because it depends on how schools will set up the schedule for the students at the school. For teachers that have autonomy and elementary teachers have some autonomy there if they're not special in their subject area, but doing flipped learning where you're creating just a screencast. Let's say it doesn't have to be long. And it can just be 5 minutes and then another one that's 5 minutes, because attention spans are short. So I actually, when I work with teachers, I say, do a 5-minute video, a 4-minute, 3-minute. So you're still getting through the content you want to cover, but they can jump in and out, because kids may need to be flexible if they're sharing a device with their sibling who needs to use that for a Zoom meeting. So kind of thinking through, how do we, if the children aren't going to be interacting and a teacher is just presenting information, make a screencast that the child can watch on his or her own time, and really think about what they're doing when you bring them together. Like, why are the kids there? You know, are they engaged? So if we really think about our best meetings that pass quickly, it's when we're doing something. Mm-hmm. And so I think having those work blocks and knowing when classes are, but if I know some teachers do watch this, so just being mindful of what the students are doing when they're with you versus just a lecture, because a lecture can be recorded, and then that in turn gives flexibilities back to family for their child to watch a lesson on their own time, maybe really early when they're up at 6 if they're very young, or later if it's a high school student that maybe does flourish working sometimes at night.
And that's such a beautiful point, because I've heard from a lot of parents concerns and questions about how much live instruction time should there be, and what's a sufficient amount and what's not. And I know, our district and our teachers unions are negotiating and trying to figure that out. But the point you bring up, I think, is so important to keep in mind, that what's the quality of that time? What is the purpose of that live, one-on-one, not one-on-one, but, face-to-face live time with your teacher?
And it goes back, I'll quickly say, because then that's when you can do the differentiated learning, right? If you needed to pull in some groups that were sort of on a similar level, you could work with that group of 4 to 6. It's just like this conversation, we have 6 people here, we're able to have a conversation. And then maybe you do smaller 20-minute meetings with those groups of kids. So you're still doing maybe an hour of instruction, but you're only seeing a child for that 20. So I think that can really help too with differentiated learning and smaller meeting times that are face-to-face, online, of course.
And I would just like to add that I think that that has been a huge discussion since last March among all the teachers, the ones at my school. I belong to a bunch of groups, Facebook groups that are all chatting. We're all really concerned with engagement. And in our classrooms, we know how to draw that out. And this is a new environment. And, we're playing in different platforms, like there's something called Pear Deck, which is a Google extension that allows kids there to be teacher-paced lessons.
Right.
And kids are responding in real time, and you can put the tiles of their responses up. So the kids are not, it's no good if the kids are just passively, staring at us and, and they're playing video games over there and they're not listening to you anyway. Right?
Well, and there's site blockers too. So parents can put up a block, if you can put time limits on all sorts of things and block sites. Right. So my kids weren't doing it, but But.
So I just want to put out there that this is probably the topic that is discussed the most among all these environments. Is we realize that this can be a very passive environment. And that's not what education is about. It's about engaging. And whether it's in a Zoom meeting or whether it's in, some digital media that you're pushing out, they're working on in real time, in their own time. So, it is a real concern and something that, we're putting our best foot forward and really trying to educate ourselves and use all the tools we can find to improve that.
Well, we could probably talk for another, 5 hours, I suspect. But I won't do that to you. And I just wanted to give Dr. Hott, do you have one final thing you'd like to say as we cap our session today?
Sure. I think we need to maintain our sense of community. We are in this together. We are facing tough choices, and most of those choices are not ideal. We as parents, as researchers, as educators, students, teachers, administrators are going to make mistakes. It's not going to be a perfect situation. Hopefully we can view those mistakes as learning opportunities. Parents, if you can support your teachers, many of our teachers are also parents. And teachers, if we can support our parents, and administrators, support your families, support your teachers, that support is what's going to be critical and get us through this and back to brick and mortar with many, many, many lessons learned.
Thank you. And Dr. Bahadur, any final words from you too?
No, I just continue to be overwhelmed by the dedication and the caring and thoughtfulness of everyone involved, our teachers, our researchers, administrators. I hate to use this word, it's so overused, but these really are unprecedented times. Like, we've never experienced anything like this, and hopefully will not again. But I just feel like everyone is coming together in such a powerful way. And I know there's frustrations and challenges, but if we can just be patient and kind to each other and supportive, I have no doubt that we will come out the other side.
And also just realizing that learning happens each and every moment of our lives. It might not be exactly the learning that would have happened if we were in brick and mortar from the academic school standpoint, but kids are learning when they're learning maybe just paper, or maybe how to push through boredom, or push through something that feels monotonous, or something that doesn't have the diversity that we can create in the classroom. Learning how to really take care of their social and emotional health and their physical health, and how do we, budget that. I'd like to also say that I think another, again, silver lining is that the students we debriefed at the end of last year, they realized the value in their face-to-face contact with their classmates, how much they learned and drafted off their classmates. So even though we're not back to that yet, the fact that they just learned that hard lesson, because they do love their devices and their digital stuff, but they've realized the value of this human contact too. So that's something to learn even through the pain.
It really seems to me, again, Dr. Bahadur, I'm also struck from last week's segment with our teachers, and then today again on online schooling, is that the teachers are working hard and they care, and they're thinking about this, and they're seeking out, I think, Ms. Latta, you mentioned the forums that you're all talking about, these small groups or differentiated instructions or ways to engage. You're really working hard all summer and thinking about this. And certainly for parents who are sort of waiting anxiously to hear, I think that's something that's really heartening for me to hear about. And so I think coming to a close for our segment today, some of just the key things to know is communication with your teachers and with your parents and with your kids. That trauma-informed approach, Dr. Roman, you talked about, which is checking in with your child or your student one-on-one. How's today going for you? It may be that your student just heard of a family member who is ill with COVID, for example. And then in advance of school starting, really getting to know that learning management or classroom management or classroom learning system, whatever it's called, Google Classroom really well. So perhaps having your child teach you, sitting down and kind of going through it together, figuring out what their active learning space is or what's a good learning space for them. And then finally coming up with a schedule and building in all those rewards through that schedule and being flexible with it. Did I leave anything out? How did I do, teachers?
I think you did great.
Did I show good engagement? Thank you so much again for joining us. Again, Dr. Tiffany Roman, Ms. Laura Preisman, Ms. Julie Latta, Dr. Brittany Holt, and of course, my lovely co-host, Dr. Neha Bahadur. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.